Today, we're at the gravesite of Bedford Forrest Carter. Or at least, that's who he wanted you to think he was. In 1970, Carter would leave his native Alabama and embark on a complete life change. He would go to Texas, first settling in Sweetwater, and utilizing the resources of the city-county library, he would write a series of celebrated novels. Over the course of just 9 years, Carter would write 1972's The Rebel Outlaw Josie Wales, also known as Gone to Texas under certain printings. In 1976, 2 works of Carter's would be published, The Education of Little Tree, and a sequel to the Josie Wales character, The Vengeance Trail of Josie Wales. In The Education of Little Tree, it would be a major departure for Forrest Carter, the purported true story of the life of a Native American growing up in a non-Native world and the major pitfalls that he would face on his road to success.
I truly believe that Forrest Carter was trying to raise the American Indian image to its highest ideal. And I think that's what made The Education of Little Tree so touching and so warm.
It was well regarded, and it was a modest success in his lifetime, but after his death would go on to be a major success. Both of these novels would go on to be major motion pictures, as well as the original Josie Wales novel, Gone to Texas, which would be his most famous movie of his work.
We are the last of the holdouts.
You'll have to run for it now.
Dying ain't much of a living, boy.
The Clint Eastwood starring The Outlaw Josie Wales would be a huge success, grossing some 10 times its budget at the box office. In 1978, he would release one final novel, Watch for Me on the Mountain, which would later be reprinted under the name Cry Geronimo. Carter would also continue to work on an unfinished sequel to The Education of Little Tree before his untimely passing in 1979 due to what was said at the time, a heart attack. Carter, who had since moved to Florida in the mid-70s on a return trip to Abilene, Texas, had got into a fistfight with reportedly his own son. He would fall during the scuffle and choke to death.
I was told that there was a graveside service first for people gathered from Hollywood and New York, some of the publishing people who had come down. India and the children were there at the same time. And these people left. And an hour or two later, the whole family went back, and there was another service for somebody called Asa Carter.
We commit Asa Carter to his final rest. And to your
I understand that they had put a headstone as Forrest Carter, and then they changed it to Asa Carter.
In fact, the true story of Forrest Carter, actually Asa Earl Carter's life, may have been the greatest story he never got to tell. Born in 1925 in Anniston, Alabama, he would go on to be an unapologetic segregationist. Losing in politics in 1970, he would move to Texas and change his whole story. But in 1991, it would finally come out.
Forrest Carter doesn't really exist. This is Asa Carter, a man who's one of the most notorious racists in the state of Alabama. And yet he's able to fool all of these people.
The nigger can get away with anything in the school. He can insult them, he can knife them, he can curse, he can tear up the desk. You ask the little children that are being knifed and brutalized, and the little girls who are having their future Christian homes.
I cannot believe that this is Forrest Carter.
It's amazing. It's just a flat amazing.
I wonder, when did he change? When did he decide did he ever change?
In fact, in the 1950s and 60s, Asa Earl Carter was one of the most violent racists perhaps in all of America. He was involved in 2 different Ku Klux Klan organizations, the second of which was more of a paramilitary type operation. He wrote behind the scenes for political firebrand George Wallace, who always denied that he had any association whatsoever with Asa Carter. More than likely, he was paid by some intermediary, but he was credited as having co-wrote a very famous speech by George Wallace.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Having worked for both Wallace behind the scenes as well as his wife when she was governor, Carter still became increasingly more disillusioned as he did not think the Wallaces went far enough. He eventually would run for lieutenant governor and would lose, likewise would run for governor against George Wallace and would place 5th, gaining less than 2% of the vote on an extremely racist, bigoted campaign. It was at this point in 1970 that he decided to leave behind not only Alabama, but also Asa Carter. As the fame of Forrest Carter continued to grow, even posthumously, eventually, the family had to know that the secret would come out. But it would take all the way from 1979 until 1991 that Dan Carter, no relation, would publish a story unmasking Forrest Carter as Asa Carter, the former Klansman. As Asa Carter's family desired for his body to return to Alabama, it would be to be beside of his parents and his wife next to him, as well as interred at the DeArmonville Methodist Church Cemetery, just outside of Oxford, Alabama, kind of in between Oxford and Anniston, the city of his birth. And even though we were here looking for Asa Carter, I always find it interesting to take a look at the cemetery that we go to, get an idea of some of the people that lived here. One of the names I saw, for instance, was a Satterfield. The only person I've known by that name was a meteorologist in the Huntsville market. So that makes me wonder, is this kinfolk? I would imagine it possibly is, having that Alabama connection. And so we know that it had to be on the adjacent side of the street. And just when we were about to give up finding it, I knew the gist of kind of what the grave looked like, but I didn't have a marker as to where it was. We finally saw it up in the left-hand corner. I saw the telltale look of the flower pot that I knew was part of the grave, and there it was. Asa Carter is somebody that will never truly understand the motivations behind what he did. Clearly, he was someone who was racist, bigoted, viewed himself superior to other human beings, yet also could convey the hardships that people went through, wanted to highlight the horrible atrocities committed on Native Americans, yet he himself had been a part of those thrust onto African Americans. It's hard to rationalize this. Did he change in that near decade that he became Forrest Carter? We'll never truly know. His brother, who had been very active in the Sons of Confederate Veterans, is buried beside of him. The black marker, his parents there to the left. And perhaps the work that Asa Carter would most like to be remembered for, the education of Little Tree, itself has met with additional controversy in the subsequent years, not only because of the background of its author, but also the story itself. It was touted by Asa himself at the time as being semi-autobiographical, when in fact that's not true at all. Maybe there were some elements. And the long-desired movie adaptation would finally see the light of day some 21 years after the book's publication. Originally envisioned as a TV movie, it would get a theatrical release and star James Cromwell. Now, the story has went on to do pretty well at DVD sales, etc., but its limited theatrical run in just 52 movie theaters at the time, did a little over $300,000. Had a little bit of competition as Titanic debuted the same day.